Linda Eastburn here. Welcome to the Linda Eastburn YouTube channel where we talk about everything Bigfoot related. I wanted to remind everyone, if you would please subscribe to the channel. It just keeps us going and it doesn't cost you anything, totally free. If you just click on that subscribe button, it's really helpful to us. And also, I'd like to remind you that my book on Bigfoot, Threshold to Encounters, is still available on Amazon.com. You can find it there both on Kindle as well as a hard copy of it as well. So, getting on with the show now, my guest today has a podcast called Trump. Let me get it right. Drunken Cryptids. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Miss Linda. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good today. If I could just speak, I would be doing better. But anyway. So
I
how
know
did
the
you?
feeling all too well.
Yeah. So how did you become interested in this whole subject?
Well, I live in Arkansas now. I'm originally from Utah. I grew up in the Wasatch Front Mountains. We had a cabin up there. We was always up there in the mountains. So, Bigfoot was always there, if that makes sense. My step grandfather kept a scrapbook of newspaper articles at the Standard Examiner, the Ogden Standard Examiner, I should say, of sightings. So, everybody in northern Utah pretty much knows that Sasquatch is there, but it's just one of those things you just don't talk about. And you'd hear all the time people would come back from either deer hunting, skiing, or just being in the mountains in general, and with a sighting as such. My mother had one. To where when she saw it in the snow, it completely freaked her out. And then, so yeah, so I grew up with Bigfoot, all the time. And we were in the Uintas, which was really neat. And during the 80s, we didn't know about Skinwalker Ranch, wasn't Skinwalker Ranch at the time, but our cabin was about 30 to 40 miles as a crow flies away from Skinwalker Ranch.
Wow. Do you think that had a bearing on some of the experiences you were having?
I think so. Well, the Uinta Mountains is, as my dad would always put it, magical. He would describe the Uintas as a magical area, God's country per se, and he absolutely loved being up there. And when you're there, when you're paying attention to your surroundings, it is a really, of all the places in the world I've been to, the Uintas has been like home, if that makes sense. There's a really unique vibe to it. And, that could be due to the fact of the matter of all the crazy cryptid paranormal activity up there. But yeah, I mean, we'd get rocks thrown at us, stuff like that all the time, and chalk it off to squirrels, you know. But other than that, yeah, that was my growing up, and so I grew up completely fascinated with the topic of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness monster and the Bermuda Triangle and haunted houses and vampires and werewolves. So I was a nerdy kid in the library reading every book I could get my hands on that dug into these topics.
Well, there's a lot of material out there, especially these days on Bigfoot and other cryptids as well. Of course, my channel kind of focuses more on just the Bigfoot aspect of the cryptid world, but certainly a lot of books, a lot of material out there. And when I started this podcast, it was around 2023 or so, and I knew nothing about Bigfoot. I mean, it was just a foreign subject to me. I had no idea so many people had had experiences. Has that been in some ways your experience to find out how many people have had a Bigfoot encounter?
It has been. And what's funny is, especially down here in the South, a lot of hunters, and I hear the comment all the time. Well, I'm in the woods all the time. I've never seen anything. And when I ask people, well, what do you mean you're in the woods all the time? Are you there like a grand total of maybe a month and a half, 2, 3 months out of the year in the woods? People in the woods all the time. They they think they're all the time, but they're near not. I go out a couple hours, go check my stand, go to my deer camp, hang out, do those things. But then when they get away from everybody else, they'll pull you aside and they'll go, okay, so one time when I was at my stand, this is what happened to me. I don't know what it was. But they won't talk about it publicly. And it's still almost a taboo subject, even though, Bigfoot, Sasquatch is everywhere. I mean, you can go to Walmart right now and buy a, Sasquatch Valentine box set. So I mean, it's a huge marketing thing. You could put Bigfoot on anything, it'll sell. But yet at the same time, too, though, people are still afraid and consider it a taboo subject to come out and say, "Hey, there is something out there. I've seen it. I just don't know what it is." And there is a ton. I swear every about, fourth or fifth person that I talk to out there has seen something in the woods.
Yeah, that's true. And I haven't been in the woods a great deal, but I grew up on a farm. We were, out in the woods often. My parents certainly were in the woods more than I was in the woods, but I don't know that they ever saw anything, even though my dad was from an area of Missouri that the blue man, the big blue man was known, which was probably a Bigfoot. And but I never, at that time when he was still alive, I never thought to ask him if he'd ever had some form of an experience. But I don't think he would have talked about it if he had, unless you ask him, because I don't think it was just that open.
No, and there's a lot of people that are still like that, and we talk about sightings and people saying they're in the woods all the time, and I'll ask him as well. All right, so especially down here in the South, we have black bear. I'll say, well, you're in the woods all the time. Have you ever seen a black bear? And they'll go, well, no. I said, so do they exist? You know, just because you've never seen it doesn't mean that it's not a real possibility, but they're out there. And, I look at it as a number of population. We see more squirrels, rabbits, deer because they have a higher population than what we're going to see when it comes to any of these other cryptids. Even growing up out west and, in the Rocky Mountains where there's grizzlies at. I've seen marks of grizzly bears on trees, but I've never seen a grizzly at all. The months and months, years I spent up there in the mountains, not only in the Wasatch Front to the Uinta Mountains, but to the Wind Rivers in Wyoming. Not one time that I ever see a grizzly bear, but they're up there. So that doesn't mean that there's not another creature that has a smaller population than a grizzly bear or a black bear just out there as well.
Well, another thing that people talk about is not finding the bones of Bigfoot, but you don't find bones of bears either in the woods.
That's correct. Well, because so predators have this really unique ability. They know when they're going to die, especially if they're an apex predator, they're going to go hide because they do not want to be preyed upon. It's a really unique thing they'll do. They'll go somewhere to hide to, pass away. And then nature has a really cool way of cleaning itself up, from the bugs to the squirrels and everything will gnaw on everything up there. It's, how this cycle works. Finding antlers out there is rare because of the fact, no matter of the high calcium they have and all the animals. So when the deer drop their antlers, yeah, squirrels and everything are running the jump on to snack them up. So same thing with the bones, everything. Nature has a way of really quickly cleaning itself up.
Yeah, that's true. And so that's why you just don't find these things. So that's not proof either. So not seeing them in the woods, not finding bones in the woods doesn't necessarily make it definite that they don't exist. That's not a strong proof piece of information.
Well, that and also, you're right. And the other side that we have to worry about that we deal with all the time is the fact that, Hollywood and mainstream media, everything is made fun of Sasquatch. They've broken it down to it's a very cartoonish cartoon character, and it's just kind of a to where Bigfoot does exist, but he's just now in our pop culture.
That's true. And definitely out there everywhere. Like you said, you can go in Walmart and find all kinds of souvenir items. There are, all kinds of places now that call themselves Bigfoot. I live close to the Branson, Missouri area, which is a big tourist attraction, and they have all kinds of Bigfoot things. They have a miniature golf Bigfoot. They have a excursion that you can go on this Bigfoot kind of funny, thing that you can do. And of course, every souvenir shop has, its section on Bigfoot. So it is a big deal.
Yeah, me and my ex-wife went to spend a weekend down in Hot Springs, and I promised her. I said, "Here's the deal: we're not going to do anything. No, no cryptid stuff. No Bigfoot. Nothing. It's just a weekend for you and me to relax and unplug and get away from everything that I have going on." And she was like, "All right." The first gift shop we walked into was wall to wall Bigfoot, and she looked right at me and went, "I'm sorry, but you put Bigfoot on anything and it'll sell." And we did. We bought souvenirs. We got a kick out of it, and but it seemed like every shop down there had something of Bigfoot, and people are they're buying it. When we go out, we're driving around with my kids. My kids will see a vehicle with a Bigfoot sticker or something on it. Like, Dad, go give them a card. They like Bigfoot. They'll like the show. So it's everywhere.
Yeah, that's true. It is everywhere and all over YouTube. It's all over TV. It's just everywhere. So we're saturated with the idea that Bigfoot exists in the world.
Yes and no. I think what they've done with the marketing side of it, though, is turning into more of a pop culture icon versus a real flesh and blood icon. And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the disbelievers are coming into place at. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to Bigfoot, the Sasquatch and all that, I think that people love the idea of it, but they're not willing to accept the reality of it.
Yeah, it's kind of like Star Wars. That doesn't make UFOs real, but it certainly put the idea of craft in the sky in our minds.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm a I was yeah Star Wars. I'm an old Star Wars nerd. Still love it.
Very popular show. So you had personal experience with a Bigfoot. So tell me what happened to you.
Yeah. So it was not. We didn't see it. It was kind of a long story with a lot of weirdness that comes into it. So it was August of 2002. I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. I served 11 years, United States military, active duty Army infantry. I was put in charge of a guard detail guarding an ammunition holding area, AHA, and so that abbreviation, AHA. So this is what a lot of my friends refer to as the AHA story. So the location, so the unit was doing a table eight and a qualification. It was August 2002. We were ramping up for Iraq at the time, so they were pushing to get everybody qualified, everybody certified, to be combat ready. And so make long story short, that's what they were doing. They set the ammunition spot where they're storing it away from the range, which they normally don't do. So it was a really hastily thrown together range for these guys to go and qualify. And you would pull 24-hour duty at the location, be off for 24, and then you report for normal duty, and then you would go back again for your guard. So I did one cycle of 24-hour duty there. Nothing happened. Absolutely, completely boring. A regular, typical August night in, Central Texas. Hot. The next cycle, I believe it was on a Saturday, and it was just payday. And I remember that. And the two guards that I had under me were from another platoon in my company. So I'd never worked with them before, knew of them, but didn't know them per se. And these two guards showed up on time. Everything was legit. We had a little camel net that we were sitting under. The ammunition from us was probably about maybe, I don't know, 15 meters away from us in a concertina wired area setup, you know, squared off, all wrapped up with concertina wire so you couldn't get into it. There was a little opening, a spot we could open the wire, pull the wire aside so we could get in and out. Normally when you pull this guard duty, you'll have a radio, you'll have a weapon. There was none of that. No radio, no weapon, nothing. It was just get out there and do it and then be done. When I got there that morning, the guy I was relieving, and I'll just call him Sergeant M, looked like he hadn't slept. And I even asked him, I said, did you not sleep last night? And he said, no, we had coyotes kept coming in. And, so we all slept in the bed of my truck. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, man, the coyotes are horrible. They're all over the place that night. And I was like, all right. So my guards had heard this as well. And we set up and it's boring, it's hot, and didn't want to eat MREs. And I can't leave the site, but I figured, you know what? I'm going to get $20 out of my wallet. Ask one of the guys that want to go down to Burger King, which was about, 20 miles away. And say, go to Burger King, grab some Whoppers. And that way we'll, eat Whoppers and kind of a little treat since we're pulling duty on a Saturday. And they did. And, the one guy did, he jumped in his car, he took off, he came back, but he came back with $20 worth of Whoppers, probably no change, nothing at all. So it's a giant bag full of these Whoppers, and we're not going to eat them all. So we're snacking, and the guys are like, hey, so can we build some traps for the coyotes? And an infantry soldier in the field who's bored is probably one of the most dangerous things in the world and the most creative. So these guys were making trying to make traps. So I refer to them in the story as Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett because that's what they reminded me of. And I knew they weren't going to be able to trap any coyote or anything. So I told them to go ahead, and they wandered out in this, the clearing where by the ammunition, and they set these traps up. And I'll go into a little bit where we're at. We were off of the main road. We call it a hardball road. We're probably a good, probably about 300 to 400 meters off of that down a tank trail. And we call them tank trails. It's just a dirt road, but for the track vehicles to go through. And we were just a little spot set off there. We had behind us on the other side of the tank trail was thick woods, and where we were at was open to a point. We had a good clearing around us, closer towards the road, about 100 meters towards the road is where the woods pick back up again. And then about 100 meters in front of us, the woods picked up, and they had clear cut through the put power lines in one section. So it looked like it had an alley cutting through it, but it was a clear cut for power lines they never put up. And the ammunition was sitting there. And then to where we were sitting at to my left was, just kind of, Texas plain, no big deal, but the woods and everything. So it's a little open area, pretty decent size. So the kids went out and, they dug these holes and set these traps up with these whoppers and came back, and we were just chilling out. And I remember when evening hit, I was had the under the camo net. I was reading a book, and Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett were just kind of visiting. And I had a can of Pringles beside me, kind of snacking on those. And it started off with one of them said, "Did you hear that?" And at that point in time, I paused my book and I went, "Hear what?" And the other kid said, "Yeah, it sounded like somebody had dropped a canteen half filled with water on the ground." And when these things, when they drop, people drop them all the time. When it drops, it makes a really distinct thunk sound with the water and everything on that plastic. So I sat there for a minute listening and heard a car in the distance go down the hardball, and it sounded like it hit something, and the echo came, bouncing off of us, and it, similar to that, distinct thunk sound. And I told them, I said, "That's what you guys heard." And they're like, "No, Sergeant, no, that's not what we heard at all. It was an actual distinct thunk. I mean, it stood out." So we were listening for a little bit. And at that point in time, I realized that where the sound they were talking about had came from, there was no insects. There was no, it was just quiet. And that was to the left, and to the right towards the road, you could hear everything. You could hear, the insects going off and everything out there making noises, but nothing on the left. It was just really, really quiet. And, doing at that time, what we do, that's generally a sign of, somebody's coming in, or, alpha predator or something, man. And I was like, okay, there's somebody over there. And as I was realizing this, all of a sudden the noises came back up on the left, but then they went down to the right, got quiet. So whatever had been on the left had moved over to the right of us. And so it was quiet. And I was like, all right. And then at that time we heard a Humvee coming down the road. And I was like, okay. So the Humvee showed up from the range, had to drop off spent brass and ammo. Well, brass and links, and they were going to pick up, and I had to get the paperwork out. So I set my book down, set my chem light by my book and the camo net, walked over the Humvee. My guys were helping the other guys unload and load up, and I was talking to the driver and counting everything off the boxes that was coming in, that was going in, the boxes that were going out, and what type of ammunition it was they were taking. And I looked over at the my camo net to get, to go grab my chem light, and I realized my chem light was missing. Chem light is just a glow stick. You use them all the time, crack it, shake it, and, have a color, green, red, purple. Nowadays they're everywhere, but in the military, they're generally green. So at that time in '02, so my green chem light was gone. And I was like, well, where the hell did they go? At that point in time, one of my guys came up and said, "Hey, Sergeant, can I borrow the chem light real quick so I can read some of these numbers?" And I was like, "Well, I thought y'all had it." He goes, "No, I don't have it." And the driver of the Humvee goes, "Well, here, I got a box, an extra box, take them." So I give me a box of chem lights. We did everything. The Humvee drove off, walked back over to the camo net, where we were sitting under, standing there, and I was looking around going, where the hell did this chem light go? And I fully expected to see the chem light just running out, bouncing, like something had it running through the wood line or something. And looking, I was like, okay, that's not right. I said, I'll tell you guys what, we're going to go ahead and mark the whole entire the pickets where the ammunition's at. We're gonna, put cam lights up on all those. It'll put a little glow, give us a little bit more light to see out there because the only flashlights it really has, I had a little small little pin light at the time, and they were like, okay, so we walk up to the first picket. I mark it with the chem light. We walk along the perimeter of the concealed wire. I get the second one and crack it. I mark it. And as soon as I stepped around the corner to go to the third one, all this happened simultaneously. To my left, where they had heard it the first time, I heard the thunk. And it was a distinct, loud thunk. It sounded just like a canteen half filled with water dropping on concrete. So this thunk happens. The same time the thunk happens, I step into a cold spot. Now, the cold spot was so cold. Now, this is August. I saw my breath in the flashlight. So these two guys are behind me. As I hit the cold spot, the thunk's going off. I'm trying to step backwards again into the cold spot, and I'm looking to my left where we heard the noise, and they're behind me. And I going, "Did you hear it? Did you hear it? Did you hear it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I heard it. I heard it that time." And yeah, okay, there's somebody. I'm not saying something at this time. There's somebody over there. He's the third. So at this point, I just walk up. I finish marking the whole site. So all four pickets now have all four corners have a chem light set up. We get back over to the camo net, and they're like, "Okay, what do we do?" I was like, "There's nothing. There's nobody out here. Now, there's nothing out here. It's probably another unit training. They might think that we're the Op 4 or they're the Blue 4. Op 4 is the bad guys, Blue 4 is the good guys when you're in training. So you have the good guys and bad guys." I said, so they probably think that we're some sort of alpha or a CP, something set up, and they're looking to see what we are. And at that point in time is when I realized that not everything around us now was completely quiet. No insects, no noises, nothing. And it had a weird vibe to it. It was dark. The moon hadn't come up yet. It was late. I mean, summertime, so obviously when it's dark is late at night. And I was like, okay, there's something out here. So we moved out, set up outside the camo net now I'm just summarizing some of this. And we stepped out of the camo net into towards the road a little bit. And we had a thicket that ran beside us that was on the tank trail, and there was a dirt berm that was there. So, and the dirt berm was probably a good about 5 to 6 feet tall. And you just sloped how it slopes on down both sides. And we were on the one side, so I stepped this away, squatted us down. So, okay, now we're going to catch whoever it is. We're going to catch these guys coming in here to mess with us. And we squatted down. We got real quiet. And it didn't take very long at all before something started walking towards me. And it was clearly bipedal. Excuse me. It was clearly bipedal how it walked towards. It was just a step. It was steady walking, like I said, straight line. And I remember I was squatting down, get my head lowered to the ground to silhouette it against the skyline to see what it was that was coming in so I could get an idea because I couldn't see it in the dark. And I probably got about, again, it's in the dark, so looking back, it's 02, maybe 4, maybe 5 feet in front of me. And the kid on my left shoulder kept saying, "Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap." And I kept elbowing him to shut him up. And like I said, I got right to the uncomfortable part where, all right, I got to see what this is. And I turned my little flashlight on. As soon as I turned the flashlight on, there's nothing that was in front of me. Immediately to my right, in the thicket, something jumps and runs. And I don't know how it got into the thicket. If you've been in, Central Texas, South Texas, you know how those thickets can be. It jumped and bolted. At that time, I jumped up, ran along the thicket to run on top of the berm to go pursue whatever this person in my mind at the time was a person. As soon as I got on top of the berm, this big rock lands right behind me. And it was huge. I didn't see it, but you could hear it. It was like a thump, thump. And I spun around to one of my guards at the bottom of the berm, and I ran down there and I grabbed him, and I'm yelling at him, "If this is you guys, messing with me," of course, it's not the language I was using. "This guy's messing with me. I'm gonna bury you both out here in the woods. I'm gonna kill you." Blah 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 blah. I'm really angry. As I'm yelling at him, I can see that he's not crying, but he has a stream of tears just running out of his eyes, and he's scared to death. He's shaking. He's absolutely petrified. As I realize that it's not him and the other guy behind me in the thick woods, something steps on a log, and it was a good crumble sound. This log just breaks. And I shoved it off of him, and I ran over the berm, and I got my little flashlight out, and I ran into the woods, and I got maybe about 10, 15 feet in there, Miss Lane, before like my spidey senses told me to stop. And this is the part that gets really kind of odd for me because I have two memories. I have the one memory of me staring with my own eyes straight ahead, looking with my flashlight. And then there's like I have this memory of looking at me from about my 1 to 2 o'clock position, looking at me moving the flashlight around. So it was weird, like an out of body at the same time. It was I don't understand it. But I do remember feeling like, okay, I gotta leave. I gotta leave. I gotta leave. I gotta leave. I'm not supposed to be here. And those woods were just dark. And at this point in time, there is no insects going on. Everything around us is absolutely quiet. So I slowly back out of the woods and I get to the back to the dirt, tank trail, and I just feel defeated. I felt like, okay, I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on out here. And I looked over and I saw my truck. And I had a great idea. So I walked over to my truck, started my truck up, kicked on the headlights, and I lit the area up. It was great. And I was like, all right, we're good. And I was like, okay, I can't do this noise on my discipline. So I turned my truck off, turned the headlights off. And since this was '02 and '01, this movie came out in the summertime. It was a big summer hit. Everybody loved it, called The Fast and Furious. And after that, everybody's putting neons on their vehicles. And I was dumb. And, I did the same thing. I put some neons on my truck. So I had neons where my windshield wiper fluids would come out. But you couldn't have the neons right around the time they're illegal. So I had a switch so I could turn them off and on. So I turned on my blue neons and lit up the area just a little bit right there in front. And I walked back over to where my guards were, and they were pretty much almost hugging each other, and they're begging, Sergeant, can we go? Can we leave? Can we leave? Can we leave? Can we leave? I was like, no, we can't leave. We have general orders. First general order is guard everything limits to my post, quit my post only when properly relieved. We can't do it. This is what we have to stay. And I turned and looked over at my truck, and something had walked in front of the driver's side neon. It winked out. So I bolted, and again, I'm about 10 feet from my truck. So just a matter of seconds, I was right there at the front of my truck. Nothing was running down the tank trail. Nothing had run into the woods. Nothing was under the vehicles. So I looked, and that's when I was like, okay, I can't beat this thing. It's not people. And I turned the switches off, turned the neons off, and I walked over to the yards, and I sat outside, sat down on the ground outside the camo net. And I remember I lit up a cigarette, and that's the last thing I remember until the sun came up. No idea what took place on that time the sun coming up. I do know that when the sun came up and we woke up, I remember truck just went. I remember telling the guards, like, I know what happened last night. It was the whoppers. Y'all set those traps up. We had coyotes messing with us. I was doing everything I could to rationalize. And I told them, I said, y'all go check those traps. Go ahead. So they did. They got excited. They trotted over and they got to the first trap and they were jumping up and down. They're waving and they're saying, they're calling my name, Sarnorton, Sarnorton, Sarnorton. So, I'm feeling pretty smug and pretty confident myself that I got this thing figured out. We had the same problem that Sergeant M had and trotted over to confirm that the whopper was gone and they, the cows just shredded it and everything. And nope, the whopper was still there. And it was at the second trap and it was at the third trap. No whoppers that night had been touched at all whatsoever, which is unusual because coyotes on any military installation know wherever soldiers are, there's food. I mean, soldiers, we leave crap at the food all the time. I mean, I've seen a coyote grab a guy's boot and run off with it, so they're definitely not afraid to come in where we're at. But that night, there was no coyotes. The encounter bothered me so much is that when I got home that morning after I got relieved, my ex looked at me and she wanted to know whether or not I had actually been on guard duty because my eyes were sunken in. I looked completely exhausted, had bags under my eyes, and she was like, what the hell happened? And I told her, I said, "You're not gonna believe me," but I told her, and she was like, "That's crazy." For even that evening, we had plans to go hang out with a buddy of mine and his wife and, barbecue, grill up, and relax. And I got there and he even told me the same thing. "You look rough, you look like crap." And I told him what happened. And he goes, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to go back. I want to go back. There's guys up there. There's something up there. I want to go back." So we got in my truck and we drove all the way up there and shocked the NYC. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I came up with some excuse like, "Oh, I had my grandfather's pocket knife. I think I dropped it. I don't know. I'm just looking for it." And pretend to look for this pocket knife. And I kept asking him, like, "Everything going okay? Everything's all right?" He was like, "Yeah." I was, "Yeah, we're fine." And it totally different feeling. I mean, everything's natural, all normal noises. Everything was, I mean, no fear, no apprehension of anything at all when I went back up that next night. So that's my crazy aha encounter.
So yeah, I assumed you looked for any kind of prints or evidence of anything that could have been left behind by whatever this was.
Furthest thing from my mind, to be honest with you. Not at one point in time that I ever stopped to think about looking for tracks or thinking that it was a Sasquatch. In my mind at the time, it's '02 still. Sasquatch is out in the Pacific Northwest. He's not in Texas. He's not in the South. This is where Bigfoot lives out there. He's in the West. He's in the mountains area. And I had never heard of anybody having anything like this at all happen to them. Period. you know, on base. The internet was still in its infancy at the time in '02, to where a lot of people don't realize is that, how new the internet still really is and just how quickly I mean, it started off slow, then boom, it evolved overnight. So there's really no way to go and log in and look. And the only time that I got suspicious of hearing anything about that encounter having to deal with a Sasquatch was some years later after I'd gotten out of the service. I was watching, Unsolved Mysteries or, one of those shows where they go and talk about, encounters and stuff. And I remember I was laying there in bed watching this one, and they were talking about these rocks being thrown at him. And I sat up, I was like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 that happened to me." And it kind of resparked everything up of me wanting to look into and dig in and research, find out what it was that we encountered that evening. And looking back and, the more I think about it, I don't think there was just one creature out there. I think there's multiple creatures out there, and which is why I was able to move around in my mind so quickly. So it wasn't just one I was dealing with, there was a couple of them. And I don't know whether they were just passing through or what they were doing, or maybe they felt they were safer right there. Cause this was a part of North Fort Hood that I had never been training in. I've been, I guess, stationed at Hood in 99, and this is '02. And we had, North Fort Hood's huge. We had never gone to this area to train or do anything. And so, yeah, I don't know.
Did you ever go to any of the sites that have reports to see if anyone else was experiencing anything like Sasquatch in that area?
Well, the only thing was, so a couple days later, when I went back to my unit, I talked to Sergeant M. I pulled him aside and I was like, "Hey, you know, let me talk to you real quick about what happened, uh, about the Yaha." And he goes, "What's up?" I said, "So that night I relieved you that morning, you said that you had coyotes." He was like, "Yeah." And I said, "Was it really coyotes?" And all he looked at me, he looked me dead in the eye and he goes, "It was coyotes," and walked off. But this is stuff that a lot of guys don't. So in the service, you start bringing up, we had a crazy encounter. We had, we saw a ghost or we saw, a creature or something out there. You kind of get flagged in certain ways. You don't get flagged, but you get labeled and you don't have that label. I didn't care. I mean, I was asking other people about like, "Hey, what's going on out here?" But at the same, a lot of guys don't talk about it because they didn't want to have that label. They didn't want to have the label of, "Oh yeah, Sarah Norton's out there seeing Bigfoot in the woods, or Sarah Norton's out there seeing ghosts, out in the field." So you never wanted to have that at all. So a lot of guys are really tight-lipped about it. What's funny though is that when they get out, a lot of soldiers, veterans and stuff will come out and say, "Yeah, while I was in, this is what happened. This is what I saw. This is what I encountered." But while you're in, yeah, nothing. I was
Yeah, I can
never able to
understand
get to the
why.
bottom of it.
I can understand why. and sometimes that can be real difficult to explain yourself, or there's a lot of ridicule around in many ways. So let's go back to that missing time period. About how long a span of time do you think that you have no memory of?
I don't know that, and that's the weird part about it is, you know, the more I've talked about the aha, the more the more you talk about your encounter, and the more you look back on it, you're going, well, wait a minute, there was missing time. You know, I don't remember anything from sitting down, smoking a cigarette till the sun coming up. And I do remember when the sun came up, I was not under the camel net. We did not get up and move under the camel net where our sleeping stuff was at. We were on the ground outside of the camel net, roughly about the same area that we had sat down at.
So
I
you
remember
never
sitting.
you never made it into the sleep area.
No, never did. That's where my
And
book was at. That's where my rucksack was at. That's where my pogey bait was. No, my Pringles, little snacks. Everything was in there. And yeah, nothing. I remember waking up on the ground and nothing else. To where me and Todd Neese were talking. Talked about this encounter a few times, and he's even brought it up to where maybe I should go back and do a regressive hypnosis. Just kind of see maybe what did happen.
yeah, exactly. I do regressive hypnosis, so I'd be happy to help you with that if you ever decide to do something. But how many people were there with you that
It
night?
was me and two, yeah, me and two guards.
And the two guards, they also had missing time.
As far as I know, yeah, because they were in another platoon. So the only time that I saw them again was about a week later, and they both came up to me like, "Hey, Sergeant Norton, Sergeant Norton." I was like, "What's up?" They said, "Hey, we looked on the map, and there's an archaeological site about 2,000 meters away." And I was like, "Okay, there's all over Fort Hood on the maps. There would be little spots set up where you don't go towards it. It's an archaeological site. So when you're training, you're trying to plan out your missions. You're to avoid those, not do anything with them. That's why they're on there." And I say, "Guys, that's irrelevant. That's not going to affect anything at all." Because it came to they had, while we were talking that day with the archaeological site, the sea guys, they brought up like it could have been like an Indian burial ground that we were on. It could have been any of those things. And I was like, no, our unit's dumb, but they're not that dumb to put us on an archaeological site that we're not supposed to be there anyways. And the location was 2,000 meters to the northwest of where we were set up at. So yeah.
So, in talking to the other two guards, other than this, did they have any other experience or insight that added to what you had experienced?
Nope, same thing. What I went through was the same thing they went through, as far as I know, and I believe same thing with the missing time. But the missing time was never brought up, and I didn't kind of really fully acknowledge the missing time until last year, actually. Doing a deep dive into it and actually writing down um, what happened and going step by step by step. This happened first, that happened next, that happened here. Okay, I remember this, I remember that, I remember this. And then, pausing, going back and go, okay, nope, okay, flip the sequence around, move this, move that. And then I stop. I can't go past us sitting down on the ground and the sun coming up. I have no memory of anything after sitting on the ground and the sun coming up.
When the sun came up and you were
Wait,
aware of
well,
it.
there is one point I do remember the moon came up. Sometime the night, the moon did pop up, and I just remember seeing the moon. Yeah, that's it. The moon did
So,
come up.
so there would probably be a way to know what time that moon came up. And you still had awareness at that point in time. When you became aware at the sunrise or sun was up, and you became aware, were you in a sitting position when you became aware? Were you lying down did you feel like you'd been asleep?
No, I don't. I can't remember what position I was in. I just remember maybe sitting up, because I do want to say that when I was awake, I lit up a cigarette and stood up, and I remember, and it's almost like we woke up at the same time. All three of us did, because I remember commenting on the fact the sun was up, it was morning. I mean, it wasn't like the sunrise. It was past sunrise, so everything was pretty well lit. And I remember telling the guys, "Hey, go check it out." And I remember looking at my watch, thinking too. I couldn't tell what time it was, but I remember thinking, "Okay, our relief will be here soon." So go check the traps. Blah 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 blah. That's what was messing with us last night. We had the coyotes. We had this. So yeah,
You notice any markings on the truck at all?
nope, no markings on my truck that I noticed. Um, yeah, not that I can pull up and remember because I
And
kept
no
my
one,
truck pretty clean. So
no unusual odors, smells, other sounds.
just a lack of sounds. That was it. And I don't remember any smells.
What do you think that sound was that sounded like a canteen hitting the ground?
I could never figure that out or the cold spot. And I guess the only thing, not to get into the woo side of Sasquatch, because there's a lot of reports out there of, portals, interdimensional things, and such. And if I was to speculate and guess, and maybe the thunk was something opening up or something popping in, and maybe the cold spot just happened to be leftover or some sort of physical effect that you felt. Because the one thing what I've looked at is if you take my encounter that happened to me that night in Fort Hood, and you put that everything that happened and you put it into a house, you have a poltergeist activity. So I don't know, and that's has me wondering more and more as to what did take place that night, and thinking more that there is potentially more in the woods than just Sasquatch. There's other things out there, obviously, from the Dogman sightings, a whole bunch of other creatures. I don't think it was Dogman because Dogman seems to be pretty, violent. But whatever was there that night, it, it almost seemed to be messing with us. But at the same time, too, though, because it wasn't aggressive. I remember that. I mean, I remember being scared, but it was not aggressive at all. And I think the fear was coming from the unknown part of I have no idea what I'm dealing with. People, another unit coming in training, yeah, I can prepare for that. Or, some good old country Texas boys want to come in and mess with us. I can handle that as well, even without a weapon. But whatever this thing was, I couldn't see it. But it was physically there, obviously, because it was throwing a rock. I mean, it stepped on a log. It walked in front of my neon and it had footsteps walking towards me. So whatever was there was an actual physical entity or entities, but left nothing behind.
So no
Um,
unusual lights in the sky, no orb activity, nothing of that sort.
Nothing of that sort. But looking back at that encounter too, though, so you remember I told you how it was walking up. I could hear it walking towards me, and I kept trying to get lower to the ground to try and silhouette it walking, stepping up. Part of that got me thinking to where for a potential Sasquatch encounter, it was low to the ground. So we get reports a lot now. A lot of people are coming forward and saying they've seen these creatures move as a type of a spider, like the spider crawl. No, I'm sure you've heard those reports as well. And listening to interviews, listening to encounters from people, it always seems to be about 90% of the encounters, everybody stays the same thing. It stood up. It stood up. Looking at my encounter there with it, the way it was moving, me being low to the ground, how something bolted through the tree line. I'm wondering if it wasn't into a spider crawl and it was taking, two steps, like you would, boom, 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 to where it would almost sound bipedal if it was moving like a spider, but being that low to the ground. This past summer, we were doing an investigation north of Heber Springs, Arkansas. And me and Chris, who's one of my lead investigators with me on my team, we encountered eye shine that, and I've been in the woods a lot, a ton. I know eye shine. I know a rabbit. I know frontal. I know eye shine. It was forward facing eye shine, about 2 inches in diameter, about 5 to 6 inches across, huge, huge. And it was about a stomach on me, maybe about 4 feet off the ground. And it flowed from left to right dropped down about 2 feet lower to the ground, looking right at us. I was slowly walking towards it. When it blinked, though, when it dropped down the first time, it blinked. I did take a step back because that's, okay, this is real. And then it moved again without head bobbing, without moving, fluid motion from left to right, dropped down lower. I mean, it was low, low, low. And I was maybe about 5 feet from it at this point in time as I'm trying to walk up to it, and gone. As soon as it disappeared, I rushed up, and it had moved behind a fallen tree with no branches on it. So I'm shining my flashlight, trying to shine through the branches, to get the ground, trying to look behind. Nothing, nothing was there at all. And it
Have you
got me
been
thinking.
so have you been prone to have any kind of other unusual paranormal type of experiences in your life?
Oh yeah, I've lived in haunted houses and such. I've had a ton of. I've had more paranormal than I've had decrypted. Um, just because I just happen to be lucky or unlucky to live in a haunted house or haunted locations or such.
Hmm. Um, so there is a theory that that kind of have more perception of things like that. Do you think that you do?
Well, I don't. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm not going to say I'm special or unique. I think everybody's special and unique in their own way. But I don't know. I do seem to be drawn more. I think that once you have encounters, I think your mind is opened up more versus people who don't have encounters. And a lot of times, people who've had their first encounter, it does leave them a little shocked and awed, if that makes sense. Because there's always seems to be reports out there as well. Once you see one, boom, you keep seeing more and more. I think it's because our brains have now acknowledged or recognized the fact of the matter that there is a creature there, or there is a paranormal thing out there, and we're able to pick up on it more to where what we would consider just squirrels throwing acorns at you or dropping acorns is now actually rocks being thrown at you, and we're able to pick up more on that and become a little bit more attuned, especially when we go to the woods or to some of these other paranormal locations.
Yeah, exactly. Going back kind of to that Fort Wood experience, did you ever coordinate the experiences that each of the three of you had to see for sure that all three of you were experiencing the same things?
No,
Okay.
no, I never did. And again, and part of the reason on that one was, August '02 timing. So I could, told a lot of people, it was like, well, why weren't you able to do it? Well, it's August 2002. We were going to war.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, be honest with you, it didn't take real long for that to get pushed out of my memory, to be honest, because of what I was focused on, what was going on, being, deployed, everything. So it wasn't until years later when I got out of the service and it was that one TV show I was watching when they talked about the rocks being thrown at them, and I sat bolt up in bed. I was like, "Holy cow!" And it just came flooding right back in. So that happened to me, and that's why I started digging more and more and more. And you know, Jacob is a really good friend of mine. Jacob goes on almost every expedition, every investigation that I do. He's a great guy. He helped co-host my show for a while. He told me years ago. He's like, "Listen, why don't you listen to some podcasts?" And I was like, "Oh, man." So my idea of a podcast was 'cause I was told in 2020 to start one, and I thought it was just kids opening up, toys and stuff like that. I thought it was one of those YouTuber thingies. So, I blew it off. But, a little bit shortly after that, he was like, "Why don't you listen to a couple of podcasts and hear some of these people's encounters and, try and figure out, what happened to you?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's probably one of the best things I can do." So I started listening to Sasquatch Chronicles, Wes Germer, and I heard a guy's encounter, and I went, "Oh, that's really kind of similar to me." So I reached out to Wes. Me and him talked, and I went on his show, and we talked about the encounter and everything. And then after that, listening, and then I started starting my own podcast. So I want to dig deeper. And then last year, last fall, I was actually listening to the confessionals with that Tony Merkel and stuff while I was working, and he had a couple of hunters come on the show, and everything that happened to them was almost identical to what happened to me there at Fort Hood. So I tell people all the time, I was like, the only way we're going to get answers to some of these is to go on the shows, share our story, share our encounters. because what happened to me in Texas happened to somebody in Tennessee, which could happen to somebody up in Maine, which could happen to somebody up in Alberta, which happened to somebody over in Thailand per se. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I interviewed a vet up that was stationed, I think, in Alaska, and very similar to you. There was, it was kind of an ammunition kind of place, and he was a guard and was making the rounds, checking on things, and something very, very strange and very ominous, presence of some sort, was there. I mean, it was obvious to him, just very, very spooky stuff. But he also has had a ton of Bigfoot encounters as well.
And that may be it too, to where you're more open to these things, when it happens. I know, like growing up, and I mean, being in a haunted house never really freaked me out, never really scared me. That night, though, I was scared. I was that was probably one of the scariest nights of my life, not knowing it. And looking back, it's I don't go on a lot of shows. I've been on a handful of them to talk about it, but I don't go on a lot of shows to share it because it does, bring everything back up and that fear. Because I mean, Miss Linda, I'm not gonna lie, those woods. When I was in those woods, that little flashlight right there after that log broke. I mean, it was dark and it was not good. I mean, I don't know any other way of describing it. The fact of the matter is where everything was telling me to leave, absolutely leave. And I don't know whether that could have been effects of infrasound or whatever was going on to be, anything, but it was just so surreal.
Yeah, I just interviewed someone this week that had a cabin in Canada, and he'd spent so much of his life there. He didn't live there, but he spent so many summers up there and often, in this place, but twice in his lifetime, very same thing. It's like this totally encompassing fear and this sense of you have to leave and you have to leave now, period. And both times he left because he just couldn't handle it. But he'd go back up there and everything was fine. But these two experiences was just beyond what he could handle. It just was such an enormous amount of sense of you have to leave.
Yep. I relate.
So
I mean, we couldn't leave. That was a down. I mean, that was a thing. We couldn't leave. So whatever happened to us after that, I don't know.
exactly. And the other two have absolutely no memory of that time either, or did you really discuss that?
Never really discussed that.
Yeah. So, but they too were not in the place where they should have been in the sleeping or anything like that when you woke up,
That's correct.
which also seems a little strange.
Yeah, looking back, that's why, like me and Todd were talking about it, about a year and a half ago or such. One of the last times we were able to get together, and we're sitting around having a couple of beers, and he's like, "Let's talk about that again." I was like, "Oh, all right." He's like, "Oh, you ever thought about maybe going and doing, regressive hypnosis, going back in time?" He goes, "I did it for my encounter." He goes, "I remembered it, but I wanted to be able to really, really remember everything that happened." And I was like, "Okay." And he goes, "Yeah, I got transcripts of it and everything." And he goes, "It's pretty emotional." And he, it was really neat for him to open up and be how emotional it was for him to see these three creatures looking right at him. These three creatures who aren't supposed to exist. It isn't supposed, they're not, science and everybody tells us these things aren't there, but here he is looking at them. So, and I'm kind of on the fence on it. I don't know how I feel about it. So I've been kind of kicking it around, but I will promise you, I will let you know if I decide to pull the trigger on it. Oop, I'll have you do it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I used to work with a lot of people who felt like they'd had some form of a UFO encounter and possibly abductions and things like that. It's like this. There's ambiguous information, maybe missing time. They see a light in the sky. They see something that looks like it's descending, and then they have no memory until maybe the next day, and they have no idea what happened or unusual things. They'll be dressed, but they wake up and everything's on backwards. So
Yep.
they don't know what happened during the middle of the night. So we would do regressions to see if we could figure all of that out. So, and it is true, you have to be ready to deal with whatever information comes through.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I mean, our clothes were on backwards and weren't inside out. I mean, it was absolutely waking up was like we would have normally woken up. Boots were still on, nothing had been messed with. All of our stuff was the way it should be. Everything was normal waking up. It's just from that moment in time after whatever it was that walked in front of my truck and me walking away from it, sitting down to the sun coming up. Well, there's a flash memory of the moon, but other than that, nothing. And I'm not going to sit on the ground and fall asleep. I'm not going to. I mean, I was, a highly trained, disciplined, non-commissioned officer in the United States Army Infantry.
Yeah. So it something happened. I mean, even if it was just you fell asleep on the ground, something took
Yeah.
place in that period of time. Just no idea what exactly. So how can people see your show? Where do they go? What else do you do? What
Oh,
if people want to know more about you, where can they find you?
okay. Well, I'm all over the social medias. I'm all over, all your streaming platforms, Drunken Cryptids at YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, all of those things. It's an encounter-based show to where we go on, I have, people who've had encounters of anything from Sasquatch all the way to fairies and paranormal ghosts, UFOs, abductions, you name it. I want to hear the story. I want to get down to it because not only am I fascinated with Sasquatch, but I'm fascinated with all of it that happens across the board because I fully believe that there is more to our natural world than we know, and it seems to where everything did a weird flip about 150 years ago. You know, for everything. We had, you don't whistle in the woods, you throw your salt over your shoulder, you do all these allegedly, superstitious things, but there's something more to it than that. You look into the fact that new subdivisions are being built in these, into the wilderness. We're expanding into the woods now in these new homes that aren't built in the 1800s. They were built 10 years ago or are haunted. So what's going on with that? More and more people are having encounters out in the woods with seeing things. And that's because people are going to the woods more, which is great because people need to get out there. So the outdoors is getting more and more and more people coming out there and hopefully respecting it. Part of the reason why I do what I do, I take my kids out the woods all the time, is so they can, learn about nature and want to protect it as well. So, we start teaching our kids now how to protect our, natural resources, i.e. the woods, those things, and they fall in love with it, they're going to want to protect it as well. So it's, but yeah, that's where my show is. So my show is based upon accounts. I got on a tangent there. I apologize. And yeah, Drunken Cooks. I am doing my own festival this June in North Little Rock, Arkansas, the Arkansas Cryptid Fest. I've got some great speakers lined up already. I've got, Todd Neese is going to be speaking. I've got Miss Betsy. I can never pronounce her last name, and she makes fun of me all the time. So I just call her Miss Betsy. But I've got like Rod Nichols. I've got Michael Cook coming. I've got Justin and Jay from Cryptid Corn. They're going to be my VIP speakers. Lots of vendors. It'll be a lot of fun. A Bigfoot calling contest. So yeah, I'm all over the social medias. I'm all over the streaming platform. So yeah, it's really easy to find me.
Not hard to find you at all. So do you get out in the woods and do you get out in the woods and do your own research these days?
Yeah, I do. So, I am disabled due to incidents that happened to me in '04, which is why I got out of the military. So I can only do so much of it at a time. But as of this recording, next weekend we're going back up to our spot. Me and Jacob are in just up in the Heber Springs area. The people on the property, throughout the winter, been messaging me, everything, keeping me up to date. It's a really active area to where that's where the ice shine incident took place at. The growl, we got growled at from there. I caught a really cool knuckle track, which kind of helped reinforce my theory on how that they are moving as a spider crawl more, down low, which is almost presented on my shirt here. And then they're upright, obviously they're going to stand up, but it's that I think that spider crawl helps explain why we'll have tracks in the woods and all of a sudden the tracks disappear. A lot of people go, oh, they don't want us to follow them. These creatures are smart, but I don't think they know that. I don't think they're that smart. It's like, people go, oh, they're afraid of cell phones. They don't know what a cell phone is. They have no idea what the internet is. They don't know what a camera is. So when people say, "Oh yeah," when I break out the phone, they're freaking out. No, no, they don't know. They have no idea. Your actions, your fast movement is what may be scaring them, but definitely not your phone or your camera in your hand. So sometimes I think we give these creatures too much credit for being intelligent, and sometimes I think we don't give them enough credit for their intelligence. I think they're more of a natural intelligence where they know the natural environment, they know that world 1,000 times better than we will ever understand it. It we understand our world, our technology, our houses, everything. And I think they're curious about us. I think they're watching us more. I think when the trash disappears, so they drop down into all four. And if you take your two fingers on your hand and you push it into the mud, it's going to come kind of close resembling a deer track.
That makes sense. Yeah, it would.
So I think it's easier for them to hunt that way for the spider crawl. I think it's easier for them to hide. I think if you look at a lot of the structures that that we do find out there, they're only maybe 4, maybe 5 feet off, high. And this is a creature that's 8 foot tall. I mean, it's got to stoop really low to get in there. I think that's where they're, the structures. And I think the structures are also used as hunting blinds. We've got some cool structures that we've been finding. And every time we find a structure, there happens to be a game trail right beside it. Like they're building these structures right next to game trails. So whenever, their prey's coming by, they just reach out and snag it.
That's a good point for people to look for if there is some kind of a structure. Is there a game trail nearby?
Mm. I think that's what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
It
sense.
almost feels like a hunting blind. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much for coming on and telling me your story. It is one of the most fascinating stories I have heard. And definitely good detail there. And if you ever decide you want to do some hypnosis around that, just get in touch with me.
I sure will. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay.
It's been an honor.
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone for watching, and please share this so other people will be able to see it as well.